So naturally, being humans, we kind of like sidle up against everybody else and we're like, well, where do I stand in this mix? What am I doing that differentiates me from someone else? Hey friends, good morning. This is Bart here. I was just reading the other day online on Twitter, somebody talking about the almighty imposter syndrome. Now, I'm not sure if you've ever felt this before or if you've ever seen it, but the basic notion behind it is that I am going to be discovered at some point for being something that I am maybe feeling like I'm pretending to be. Like I'm not a technician yet because I haven't learned enough. I don't personally feel like I've gone that far. Or I'm not a good enough musician yet because I haven't accomplished X, Y, and Z. And someday someone's going to find me out and say, you're not a musician, you're not a technician, you're not an artist. Because I know it at the heart of me that I'm an imposter. Now, this is obviously really toxic, a dangerous mentality to get yourselves into. And the shocking thing for me is that it is wildly prolific. People feel this all over the place. I encourage you to talk to some of your peers and your coworkers about imposter syndrome, especially when you get into industries like software development. And all of this networking technology that we talk about on a day-to-day basis in the world of cloud computing. These are industries where people are coming from a huge variety of technology backgrounds, general education backgrounds, communicational education backgrounds, and we're all kind of thrust into this modern workforce world where we're trying to, accomplish something for ourselves, accomplish something for our communities, hopefully, and then, accomplish something for our organizations that we're a part of as well, or whatever teams we want to be a part of. So naturally, being humans, we kind of like sidle up against everybody else and we're like, well, where do I stand in this mix? What am I doing that differentiates me from someone else? And indeed, imposter syndrome can be crippling. I know there's been a number of times throughout my career when I was working comfortably in a salary position and I was considering going into a contract position where I would be on my own, self-employed. I did eventually take that dive. And it worked out really well, but it did require me to look directly in the eye, this imposter syndrome concern, and say, you have done these things, you know these things, and you need to be confident in expressing that. So this was a whole other thing that I certainly didn't learn it in school. I maybe picked up elements of it from other coworkers and other jobs along the way, but it wasn't really until later era here, some 15, 20 years after I got into the IT industry, that I've really finally come to grips with imposter syndrome. And there was a really fun situation I got myself into a few years ago that really kind of brought this all to head. So just a quick history on myself here. I went to high school, graduated from the school that I went to most throughout my grade schools there back in Maryland. After that, I traveled for a while and then went back home and went to an associate's program for just shy of 2 years. Got certifications there, got placed into a job position pretty quickly after that, and started my first tech position because of the certs that I had there. Now, this was just an associate's degree. And so this program put me in a place where I could get a job and start learning a lot more. And I did learn many, many things since that time. Towards the end of that career change there, I became an instructor. And as a trainer, you become this obvious spearhead point of confrontation. Maybe confrontation is not the right words, but interactions with learners and students and businesses. And of course, in the consulting role, it's the same role there as well. So I was regularly finding myself in these positions where I would have to demonstrate why someone should listen to me or why they should take my class. And it happened regularly because, like we talked about just a few minutes ago, this is the world we exist in, where we're kind of keeping bar with our other coworkers and our peers for a number of reasons. So naturally, people want to understand why they should take my classes, what they're going to get out of it, and why my opinions are worth listening to. And of course, this is absolutely where the imposter syndrome comes in, because in order to put yourself out there and feel comfortable and confident and satisfied in that sort of relationship, you want to make sure you're bringing something good to the table. So for me, I constantly would come up against a class the night before teaching a subject, and I would be like, oh my gosh, I would be panicking, thinking I'm not ready for this. I don't know enough about this. Only to come into the class the next day and find out that there was a lot of students that wanted to ask questions about things that I had learned on it months ago, years ago. So I found that I was often able to dig myself into a far more perceived hole than what was really out there for me. Okay, so back to my story. I became a trainer, and one of the gigs that got offered to me a few years ago was a chance to go to Saudi Arabia and deliver a class for some technology companies that were over there. So I ended up going on two separate trips for 2 weeks to Riyadh, Saudi Arabia to deliver classes for the Saudi government. Most of our students worked for the Saudi government itself. Really humbling experience for me because I walked into a room where most of the students there had not only master's degrees, but master's degrees at American universities. These were very well-established technology professionals with countless certifications and accreditations. And here I am rolling out of my yurt in North Carolina like, hey, let's talk about cloud computing. So there's this big gap that I felt like I needed to bridge. And until I came into that, into an understanding with my own imposter syndrome, it was going to be really hard to get up in a group, in front of a group of individuals like this. Now, these are folks that I want to ask questions of. These are folks that I am curious how they solve problems. What's their thought process like? And they knew a lot of the tools that we talked about. So in the end, I was curious to find out that they really did enjoy the class, that a large part of it was a chance to facilitate the conversations between team members that weren't being had. Many of the systems folks came to me and they're like, we're so glad you brought up that networking thing because we can't get our teams to talk about it. Or networking teams or software teams that came to me and they're like, we're so glad we had that conversation about database locking and about some of the limitations in data models. You having that conversation with us and getting the team talking about it was really valuable. And so this was something where the light bulb was going off even after having done this for many years. I still realized finally then that it was about that communicational element, the facilitatory role, and that perhaps it wasn't just the raw information that I was bringing that was valuable to them, but the opportunity to talk about it, to build a community around it. And if you've watched any other lessons, or if you followed folks like Network Chuck or seen some of the CBT Nuggets teams, we talk a lot, or seen some of the CBT Nuggets content, we talk a lot about building a team, building a support network. And one of the big things we do at CBT Nuggets is learner advocacy. We have teams that will just be there to help you have those conversations. And visualize where you want to be and how you want to get there, just like I was able to provide to those classrooms. Now, the story gets even more interesting because towards the end of my first visit there, on one of my second weeks that I was there, the folks that hosted the meeting, they were like, we have a big opportunity. We want to go talk to the Saudi government. They would like to run some more classes, but they want to talk to the trainer. Okay, so now this is interesting. So they're basically saying the boss of all of the people within the Saudi IT division at the government itself, one of the highest positions that you could get to in the IT world within the government of Saudi Arabia, is asking for me to come and chat with them. So now my imposter syndrome like creeps over the back and he's like, Bart, are you ready? Do you have this? So fast forward a little bit farther, and I end up going into the office with my other business partners who were there, the ones that had that were sponsoring me to come out for the classes. And I had put together a really simple little presentation that was basically about why we're having the wrong conversations around cloud computing. Because what I really wanted to impress on this guy was that I am here not to tell you what to buy. Okay, you guys have already bought all sorts of things. I am here to help you unravel the mess of culture and direction behind using cloud style computing models rather than just trying to tell you what to buy or which classes you guys need to go take to get to a certain level. And so my goal was not really overly technical. And that was the whole point behind what I wanted to bring to him. Anyhow, we got into the meeting and he's looking at my resume and he's seeing that I don't have a master's degree. He's seeing that I don't have some major college on my thing. And he flat out calls it out. He says, Mr. Castle, why should we listen to you here? I'm looking at your paperwork. Most of my employees have far superior credentials to what you have here. So I'm like, all right, well, this is just going fantastic here, and you're getting a little sweaty and you're feeling the stress. And so what we ended up doing was kind of like taking a step back and pointing out that you're right. And my goal here wasn't to tell you something that you don't know about these things you've learned, okay? My goal is here to make sure that you guys are having the right conversations. And so in the end, what I realized was that this imposter syndrome that I was feeling was like 85% fabricated by me. And when he finally called me out on it in all the ways that I had been terrified someone would, I was able to dip back into some of the things that we had learned about why the business side of technology is so important to understand. So I started dipping into that part of it and talking about the relationship between business and technology and how that is not necessarily always well illustrated by paperwork and credentials, that maybe you need to have somebody who's coming from the trenches, so to speak. Okay. In the end, we were able to get another class set up with them and do a lot more great training down the road. But that meeting that day brought directly to head my concerns about, am I good enough at what I'm doing to teach this? Do I have something valuable to provide to the organization, to the industry as a whole? And so at one chance, I was chastised by this director, but on the other hand, we were applauded by the students for giving a great opportunity to have a lot of really important conversations around security, software development, systems architectures, administration, automation, all of the great things that I'm really passionate about in cloud computing. So that kind of brings me down to the last thing that I wanted to talk about when we are trying to address this imposter syndrome concern. One of my very first jobs I ever had was in construction. And if you've watched any of my other videos, you may have heard me talk about this some. It's where I learned to love tools and I love problem solving. So that all came from that world. Now, my dad used to say that there were two kinds of people who would swing a hammer. There were builders and there were craftsmen. Okay. And what I wanted to bring up here is that when you think about a builder is really focused on the notion of executing a plan. Okay, this is the plan that someone has given me. I'm going to follow these instructions. I'm going to hammer these nails, cut these boards in these ways to achieve this specific result. Okay. Now, a builder is absolutely something that we need. We need lots of builders. The craftsman is defined a little differently. When we think about what a craftsman does, they bring an element of finesse, an element of creativity, and an interest, okay, in refinement to it. So this is where I'm trying to get back to on this imposter syndrome piece. As you begin feeling this imposter syndrome, ask yourself, what do I have to offer in the builder side of things? What things do I know how to do? And then also ask yourself, what are the craftsman elements of what I do with those particular tools themselves? And you might be thinking, okay, well, how is there a craftsman element to being a network help desk technician? Well, in the interactions you have, in the communications that you have, and in the way that you approach problem solving and engaging your customers, the people who open the tickets, the people who are closing the tickets around you, all of those things create a bubble of culture and facilitation that is more akin to the way that a craftsman approaches something than just being a builder who closes tickets. And this is where I think those lifelong learners are going to have such much better success here. So as you're feeling imposter syndrome, dig into your bag, ask yourself, what do I know how to build? And what are the craftsman elements behind how I do this? And what can I develop further? You may find that there's an obvious answer to it. You may also find that you have more to offer there than you might have thought of before. And it brings up a good opportunity to think about mentorship and building that community model. One of the best things that I heard recently, and this was something Chuck Keith was saying the other day, he was talking about how the way that he studies is by thinking about how to teach it to other people. Okay, now this is a great old adage, you know it the best when you know it well enough to teach it to other people. So I encourage you to find a community of others that you can support in your own way to give you value to the things you know how to build and the things you know how to craft already. And this should give you a much more sure footing to reach farther, reach higher, study harder, and keep pushing. Because ultimately the biggest cure to imposter syndrome is being a lifetime learner who continues to develop, continues to sponge, and continues to, I think, in closing here, find ways to deliver that back and participate in a community of others who find value in that information as well. This is something that's really important to me in my cloud study groups. Currently, we're trying to get our learners at CBT Nuggets ready to actually teach some of this information. So I give them a chance to actually present that info to a group of peers. We're just a bunch of other learners who want to talk about cloud computing. So if this is something that's interesting to you, consider starting your own study groups. I know the Lab Everyday community out there in Cisco land has got a great network of this going on. There's people on Facebook and on Twitter that are performing these groups. Okay, so find that community, dig into it, find a way to give back, and I guarantee you're going to find that imposter syndrome a lot easier to overcome and overhaul in the years ahead. So stay positive, my friends. Keep learning, fight off that imposter syndrome, and remember that you may have value there that you didn't see originally. Sometimes it takes a team of your peers to help you understand that part of it. We'll see you out there in the cloud, friends.